Hey all. As I prepare this episode, I'm keeping a running list of each of the steps involved for a future video. Right now, I'm on step 2, which is writing out the script for this episode. Well, that's a lie. I'm actually on step I don't know which is recording the episode. So anyway, watch for the How I Make an episode coming up maybe at the outset of April. We'll see. So, retirement. I've alluded to my retirement a couple of times over the past few months, though I considered myself semi-retired since I was in my early 30s. My official retirement date at 66 years and 10 months of age is the 4th of May, 2026. That's in just over a month. Now, if I've been retired or semi-retired for over 30 years, what's going to be special about becoming a real-life retired person? Well, I'd like to go into that, but before that, for anyone out there who may share my circumstances, I want to go over the process involved in my home country, Spain, just in case anything I experienced may be of use or advisory content for the unprepared. Don't think I've not noticed how many USAers are heading out of the country, some landing here on the peninsula. I must begin by pointing out that though I use the term Social Security, there's air quotes there, in reference to both the USA Social Security Administration and the Spanish INSS, Instituto Nacional de la Seguridad Social, or Social Security National Institute, the two administrations are very different, not necessarily in being organizations that deal with pensions and benefits as well as health care, but rather in the laws and rules they follow when doling out money. A great example of how different they are is a simple comparison between Medicaid-Medicare in the USA and the social health safety net in Spain that guarantees that sickness does not lead to bankruptcy. First, my circumstances. I didn't work very consistently while I lived in the United States. That would be for the first 30 years of my life. Oh, I worked, but the longest stint was at the hammer factory. That would be for 13 months. The shortest at Kmart when I was a junior in high school hell. That was just a week. There were a lot of other jobs I had that didn't get registered with the Social Security Administration, so when push came to shove, I had only accumulated 29 of the 40 required points in order to qualify for some kind of retirement subsidy or payment or pension in the USA when I left the country for good in 1989. I then spent around 14 years living off-grid in Spain, making a living but not being registered in the Social Security of this country. Once I became a legal resident with a work permit, I continued to work part-time, semi-retired remember, and so despite having worked and paid taxes for over 20 years, my accumulated years towards a pension here was only a bit over 8. The minimum number being 15 years paying the Social Security tax. Bummer, I wasn't even eligible for a pension in Spain. That was generally my status 2 years ago. My unemployment had run out. I was not going to get a decent paying job at my age, 64, no boobs, no job. I decided to go for a special stopgap payment from the Spanish government. Problem was, the requirements for that payment included the 15-year minimum contribution to the Social Security. Bummer. Yet, as I sat across from Pilar, the civil servant at the Social Security office, she must have seen the crestfallen look on my partner's face to hear that I had no chance at a regular Spanish retirement pension. Well, Pilar says, you worked while you were in the USA, right? Yes, I had. Well, Pilar says, you fill out this form and bring it to me this week and we'll ask the United States to send us your vida laboral. That is work life. That is a list of all the jobs you've had that contributed to Social Security there. That time can be added to your Spanish vida laboral and maybe you'll have enough years. But this won't help you much with the stopgap benefit you're asking for right now, since the USA is notorious for taking a long time to reply to these information requests. At least we'll probably have received the documents a couple of years from now when you're applying for your pension. Pilar was kind of a scratchy woman who snuck out of the office frequently to smoke a cigarette, so a lot of what could be interpreted as mala leche, that is, a shitty attitude, was probably a result of nicotine addiction withdrawal. She was, though, a very good civil servant. She told me in that meeting 2 years ago that I should not despair. First, the Spanish government was on the verge of changing the way workdays are calculated, so that might be to my benefit. She also informed me that the USA was on the verge of signing a new Social Security agreement with Spain that would also simplify the process. Yay! The Spanish system counts years, as you may suspect from my earlier comments. Those years are 365 days long, as in most places on planet Earth. That means you need to work so many days to accumulate one official year towards the pension minimum of 15. I suspect it's something like 260 days equals 1 year, but I don't know for sure. As I worked part-time, any employer of mine could calculate what percentage of a day I was working in order to pay lower Social Security taxes. Those taxes are shared between the employer and the employee, the employer paying more. So, if I worked 3 hours in a day, that could be considered 40% of a full workday, which means I needed more than 2 days' work in order to accumulate one of the 260-some days needed to equal a work year. The European Union decided a while back that it was unfair for a worker to clock in half a day but only have that half day counted as half a day. In the majority of cases, working that half day was a necessity or a reality of the work, and many times a half-day worker was unable to get another half-day job to complete the full day. In my case, because my work permit was linked directly to my employer and the nature of my work was part-time, and because my employer specifically added a no competition clause in my contract, meaning I could not work for any other academy while working for him, I was at his 40% mercy for, 5 years, I think. Can't be bothered to look for exact dates today. That means that in those 5 years, I'd only earned 2 years towards the 15. The same happened in the next academy I worked at. The same happened when my boss in the agricultural machinery import business finally decided to contract me part-time. Spain took a few years to get the legislation written up, but in 2024, those 20% and 30% and 40% workdays were finally calculated as full workdays, and my total number of years went from 8+ to 16+, which meant that I qualified for what I considered the early retirement pension stopgap payment. The requirements were exactly the same for this benefit as for the pension, save the documents from the US. I was granted this benefit. Until the official day of my retirement, I would receive a very modest sum that would help me face day-to-day cost of living expenses. Great, don't have to think about the administration for a couple of years now. Plus, not letting it slip, that new agreement between the USA and Spain signed back in 2024 on Social Security retirement payments did simplify the process. Instead of trying to combine apples and oranges through translating the USA method based on points earned based on total money earned in a year to the Spanish method of counting days, then years worked, and then make both countries pay their percentual part of the final pension bill to the retired taxpayer, it turns out that the possible pension from both of the countries is calculated, and the country that offers the taxpayer the best deal is the one that ends up providing the pension, the other country off the hook. So, since I have no chance at any type of benefit from the United States, remember I've only got 29 of the 40 necessary points, but I am totally qualified for a Spanish pension, Spain wins, and the USA can wash its hands of me. Okay, 2 years have passed, me happily collecting my monthly benefit payment, which is, let me remind you, based upon my taxes paid in, so I have contributed to this fund. It is not charity, it is a social program I have helped pay for. Well, an alarm rings on my phone. I look, there is a calendar notification, something I only have for dentist and doctor appointments, and my trimester check-in with the unemployment office is part of the requirements for receiving the benefits. This notification reminds me that I am now in the 3-month pre-retirement window and can begin the application process for my pension. I have from this date, the 4th of February, until 3 months after my retirement date to apply for my pension. I go online to make an appointment at the INSS, which is what I'll call Spanish Social Security from here on. Since COVID, you can't get into any government office without an appointment, and you can mostly only make appointments online. The system is not giving me an appointment possibility in my local office, just in offices that are at least an hour's drive from my home. No go for me. My local office is a regional office as well. It's in the provincial capital. I want my local office. That's where the boss works. Tomorrow I'm in town anyway for some grocery shopping. I'll just go to the INSS office and make an appointment in person at reception. But no, the security guard tells me that you can't make an appointment in person anymore because there is no one in reception. Appointments can only be made online, or if you're really old and don't understand technology, you can sit on a telephone line for hours listening to cheesy music while waiting for a robot to help you get an appointment. I point out to this guard that there were no appointments available for this office, which I could see was strangely quiet. Of 4 or 5 civil servants attending citizens, only 2 were actually doing that. He told me to insist that right around midday is when they opened up the next couple weeks to make an appointment online. Now, my calendar alarm was set for early February. I thought I'd get an appointment then and get the application in 3 months early, giving the INSS plenty of time to get the ball rolling on the paperwork. But even insisting I couldn't get an appointment for the application process until early March. No problem, a month later than I had liked, but it was within the window. In preparation for the appointment, I went over the paperwork I'd done for the current benefits, considered if I would need to present any documents. I thought not. Looked at the application online and figured that it would be a simple act of showing up, having the civil servant help me with the application, link it to the data INSS already had about me in their computer files, and send it on its way towards approval. Not so. The main reason I'd chosen to go to INSS offices instead of filling out the application online was that that application had the expected, vague, ill-defined red tape language that could lead one to put the wrong answer or not consider having to answer at all, and I wanted a civil servant to walk through the process with me. That wasn't going to happen in the first appointment. The civil servant started by asking me a bunch of questions that had already been answered 2 years ago. She would not open my file on her computer to see what documents I'd processed then, and was pretty insistent in my having to wait for the USA to respond to the information request sent by INSS 2 years ago on my behalf. Oh yeah, whatever happened to that process? I'd signed a power of attorney allowing the INSS to ask on my behalf that the USA provide confidential, at that time, Social Security information in order to apply the U.S.-Spain pension agreement to my case. Why was all this necessary? Well, though I could easily download this document from the USSSA website once I'd identified myself, the Spanish administration insists on getting this type of document directly from the horse's mouth. Had the U.S. Social Security Administration ever replied? Well, just so happens that 2 years and 3 months after the information request, INSS had indeed received the confidential information on my USA Vida Laboral. I'd received a letter from the INSS informing me of the receipt of that information only last November. It would be in my file on that computer if the civil servant would only open my file. She would not. Now, I made a lot of mistakes before this appointment that made it kind of an exercise in frustration for both sides. And those mistakes were pretty stupid on my part, especially after becoming an expert in navigating the red tape in the Department of Agriculture, the Motor Vehicle Department, and a whole lot of non-governmental bureaucratic-like businesses. Just try to homologate a combine header wagon imported from the UK into Spain. I should have gone in with a copy of the form filled out. I should have had copies of my national identity document, my passport, the libro de familia that documents my marriage and lack of offspring, as well as a copy of the USA Vida Laboral that I was able to download online. I had none of those things, hadn't even brought with me that letter from November showing that there would be no need to ask the USA for their information again, leading to an additional 2-year wait. I deserved to be sent home to do my homework. So I went home and did my homework. That civil servant, didn't catch her name, had given me 2 copies of the form I had to fill out. It was exactly the same form to be filled out online if I had done it that way. While I studied this form and tried to find information online about how to fill it out correctly, I was also trying to get another appointment to present my application. The system would not give me access to my local office again. I insisted. I finally got an appointment for the 6th of April, now only a month before I officially retire. That's not good, pushing the whole thing back another month. I alluded to this earlier, but part of the pinch I was beginning to feel was that official date of retirement, the 4th of May 2026. By law, my pension payment would begin the day after my official retirement day, that is the 5th of May. That same day, I would cease to be eligible for the stopgap pre-pension benefit I was collecting. It would cease to be paid out. So, if there were any delay in approval of my pension application, I would suddenly be left without collecting any benefits until a resolution had come. Remember those 2 years and 3 months for that stupid USA Vida Laboral? So I'm all weekend studying this form, filling it out in pencil, then filling it out in a PDF file I found online so that everything would be crisp and clean, finally filling out the penciled version with ink because the PDF version reduced the font so small in some cells that you'd need a microscope to read my email address or bank account number. At the same time, my mate is banging away at the appointment app on the INSS website and manages to get an appointment for Monday. That's great. I'm ready. Just had a quick coffee break there. Well, quick. Gosh, 40 minutes. Back to the text. The first time I tried to register a combine harvester in the ROMA, Registro Oficial de Maquinaria Agrícola, that is the official agricultural machinery registry, I found that I had to fill in a form, pay a fee, present a number of documents like the bill of sale and the original documentation of the machine. As I looked at that form for the first time, I found I had to fill in a cell that was titled Denominación. Now, I've lived in Spain for more than half my life. I've spoken Spanish almost exclusively for over 40 years now. The word denominación, well, I know what it means. It's usually used to refer to an official regional tag placed upon agricultural products like wine or beef or cheese. I was registering a combine harvester. I asked the civil servant on the other side of the counter what I was expected to put in that cell. She told me, with a shit attitude tone of, "You should have known," that was where I put the name of the buyer of the machine. Oh, why not call it purchaser's name instead? I foolishly asked. There was no reply. So, and I'm probably generalizing unfairly, though I don't think so, you've got 2 very normal situations when dealing with red tape in Spain. One is the language used in the red tape realm, language that can be vague or confusing or dry or even full of errors. The other is that shit attitude of Spanish civil servants who know the answer but who don't always consider that a regular Joe Blow from the street might not, and that's why he's asking. It can really turn one off on civil servants, who are here called funcionarios, that is, people who make things function. That's what I tersely commented to that civil servant when she turned away without answering me. Your job is to make things function. How about helping me out here a bit? That shit attitude is not always going to be there, but I've seen it enough in different administrations to know that it is possible. On the first point, the vague language, well, you have to do the best you can and either search the internet for some advice, of which there is not much on specific forms that have to be filled out, or look for a solicitor to pay to do the paperwork for you, but who will meet with the same obstacles and attitudes as you do, will just charge you for saving you the headache. Or ask the civil servant, knowing that you might get a snarky reply, or maybe no reply at all. On that snarky reply, it is important to remember that these people are indeed there to help you make things function in our society. They are people who have had to study a bunch of really boring topics in order to pass a fairly difficult test in order to fill a civil servant job for which another 1,000 people will have studied and passed the same test. Some people spend years preparing for and taking that test. Once you've got your job, it's often your job. You'll have it until you retire. You've got your regular salary paid out in 14 monthly payments a year. You've got your 9 to 3 workday. You've got your month's paid vacation, your pension as assured, your health care completely covered. You may or may not feel a vocation towards the job, but remember, here these people are not servants. They do not serve civil society as much as they are people who make civil society function. I think that's an important difference, even if the funcionarios in the Department of Motor Vehicles are just as shit attitude-ridden as Patty and Selma represent the DMV workers in the USA to be. So, if a civil servant, that is, funcionario, here in Spain is snarky, if he or she gives you that "you should have known that" tone of voice when answering your questions, play dumb. You are an alien. You can ignore attitude. The strongest action is to honestly thank them for pointing out that you should have known that. But above all, make sure you go to the appointment prepared. That means you need a sharp-looking document carrier, folder, small briefcase, and that document carrier is full of well-ordered documents, both originals and copies. Just walking in with that oblong document carrier under your arm will do wonders with your relationship with the funcionario. When they see this document carrier, they seem to relax. This is a person who has done his or her homework, will hand over the copies asked for, will provide any that are missing in a timely manner. On the form, well, it's best to fill it out first in pencil. You can go over the information you are sure of in ink, your name, identification numbers, birth date, the stuff you've known all your life. When you get to a part that you don't know the answer or are unsure of, well, leave any reasonable answer in pencil and ask for clarification when you're in your appointment. Remember to take a pen to pen in the right answer. In my case, one of 5 doubts I had was if I needed to put my U.S. Social Security number in each cell in this column or not. That's when I was glad on that Monday to sit across from Pilar again. I'm pretty sure she remembered me from the week before. The civil servant attending me couldn't understand me through the thick plexiglass COVID screen they still have up, and I, in a bit of frustration, had raised my voice to be heard. I'm also pretty sure she remembered me from 2 years earlier when she'd helped me out with getting the USA information request filed. Though she began the appointment with a couple of "you should have known" shit attitude remarks, as we went through the process of transferring my handwritten application into the system, she warmed up to me, joking about how diverse my USA vida laboral was, from shelf stocker to hammer factory worker to airline station manager to theatrical director to costume shop receptionist to ESL teacher. "You're so polifacetico, multifaceted," she quipped. Pilar told me not to worry about putting my U.S. Social Security number in that column. She also rounded off dates here and there to make the application cleaner and easier to peruse. She didn't have answers for everything and twice had to consult with her boss. The entire process took about an hour from presenting my handwritten form. Pilar wouldn't take the PDF form because the font was so tiny it would just piss off the next funcionario in line, not to my advantage, to handing over the last photocopies of my own personal documentation and thanking Pilar for her help. My application was officially registered as presented. It's unlikely I will be refused the Spanish pension. Pilar and her boss both highlighted that I was already collecting the pre-pension benefit, which, despite being classified as unemployment, everyone knew was a pre-pension benefit in reality. The government gives itself 6 months to resolve these applications, though they rarely take that long. Pilar said 15 days. That's fine and good, but I got an SMS the same day telling me that the INSS would resolve my application and communicate such to me on the 5th of May, the day I should begin benefiting from my pension. There seems to be more vague language here. Resolve seems to mean the yes-no answer, which should come in 15 days, while the INSS website uses the term process in relation to the retirement date, which means the actual payment order being registered. I check the progress on the website every day. Same message.
Your application is being processed. We will contact you by mail and message when the application has been resolved.
Sounds like they're covering for themselves. So that's pretty much the rub. You want a list?
Do your homework.
Read up on the process you're about to undertake, be it applying for a pension or applying for a work permit or anything at all that involves an administrative office.
Fill in the form.
Even if it is only a rough draft and you'll need to make some corrections, if you've got a filled-in form to present, you've got something the funcionario can hold in his or her hands and go over and give you that
"you should have known"
shit attitude about.
Bring originals and copies of all the possible documentation you might need.
In most cases, there will be instructions about documents. Most forms actually have a checklist for the civil servant to fill out with all the possible documents in cases where documents are needed. Look at that list and make sure you have everything, and maybe more.
Always stay calm and thank the funcionario, even when it feels that they are being snarky or showing a shit attitude.
They spend hours every day under fluorescent lighting with recycled air and toxic work relationships in the job that they may be doing until their own retirement. Think of this. Mariano Rajoy, who was the Spanish president for 2 eternal terms until he was voted out by a no-confidence vote, well, he went back to the job he had occupied before becoming president. He was a funcionario in the property registration office in his hometown. Can you imagine going to the DMV and finding Bill Clinton behind the window he'd occupied before becoming president? Kooky, right?
Start early, but don't get impatient with the wait.
As I told the story here and there, people would reply, yeah, Spanish red tape. Both Spanish and non-Spanish people would immediately push the blame on Spanish bureaucracy. And I have to point out that the USA, and I requested while Biden was still president, took over 2 years to send a list of points that I could have downloaded in 20 seconds. And just last week, I get this email from the U.S. Social Security Administration asking me to install an app that I can use to report my friends and family and neighbors if I suspect they are committing Social Security fraud. As to what I'm going to do once I'm retired, well, pretty much the same I've been doing for the past 40 years. Stuff you can see me doing in the video B-roll that accompanies these words. Oh yeah, one thing I'm going to do is unsubscribe from all employment platforms and stop looking for work. I'm retired. Finally, I'll take advantage to announce that this season 6 of You're Listening to Radio Revel, is promptly coming to a close. There might be that episode in which I describe the creative process and the actual work behind producing an episode for your listening radio Revel. In any case, sometime in April, I'll be shutting down production for a few months while I embark on spring and summer activities. I'll talk more about that later on, probably. Cheers.
You're listening to Radio Revel. Listen, like, subscribe, and share.